Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's fourth space, and thank you for joining us for today's event, the Unfolding of Ardhanārīśvara. Now, to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube, live from fourth space, and we are located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And at fourth space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-creating daily activities that examine research questions and projects in development across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream meeting. So at the end, we do welcome questions and comments via the chat. If you're joining by Zoom, for those of you in the space, of course, if you'd like to ask a question, just let us know. We'll get a microphone over to you. And with that, it's very much my pleasure to hand it over to the organizer of the South Asia Speaker Series and assistant professor in religions and cultures, Saparnika Baliswaminathan. Saparnika, welcome.
Thank you, Doug. Welcome everyone again to the Southern Asia Studies Speaker Series. For those of you who've been coming here for a while, welcome back. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. I hope you'll come to the next two talks that we have, which will be the last two in the series of 6 talks that have been organized for the year. So these talks were conceived as a way to build networks across everybody who is working on South Asia, between departments, between universities, and across regions. The other objective of these talks was to introduce innovative new research that was being done by emerging scholars, one of whom is going to be our speaker for today. I'm going to introduce Phil Lagace, who's going to be giving the talk, The Unfolding of Ardhanārīśvara. Phil is a PhD candidate in the Department of Religions and Cultures at Concordia University, and he's also an instructor in the Religion Department of Dawson College. For the past decade, his research has largely centered on Ardhanārīśvara, a composite Hindu deity whose body is split into male and female halves by a medial axis. As part of his SSHRC-funded doctoral project, he is currently also investigating the ways in which this figure relates to populations associated with the third gender designation in India. So I'm going to hand it over to Phil. And as Doug mentioned, if you have any questions, if you're online, you can put it into the chat box. And if you're here, you can raise your hand and I'll come around with the mic. So thank you very much, Phil.
Testing? I'm on? Okay. Okay, thank you, Dr. Baliswaminathan, for inviting me to speak, and to all those in attendance today. As mentioned, the title of my talk is The Unfolding of Ardhanārīśvara. This presentation draws from over a decade of research, but will emphasize some key elements of my current doctoral project. To begin, I should unpack a word here that may be unfamiliar to some of you: Ardhanārīśvara. Ardhanārīśvara is a Hindu deity whose name actually combines 3 words: Ardha, meaning half, Nari, meaning woman, and Ishvara, often rendered as Lord. Thus, Ardhanārīśvara is translated along the lines of the Lord who is half woman. Accordingly, in iconography, the figure is shown divided into male and female halves by a medial axis. The male half is represented by the god Shiva, while the female half is generally represented by the goddess Parvati. When first researching Ardhanārīśvara, I began by familiarizing myself with all available works centering on the figure. In doing so, I found significant scholarship on its visual depictions, its place within poetry and mythological narratives, as well as its relationship to philosophical thought. Yet one framing of Ardhanārīśvara struck me as particularly intriguing. The figure was sometimes described as significant to populations now affiliated with the third gender category in India. For now, I will say that in the Indian context, third gender is both a legal category and an umbrella term, referring to a variety of people whose gender identity does not fit neatly into a static male-female binary. Associated with this third gender umbrella is the term transgender and a host of South Asian designations. Importantly, I noticed some issues in how Ardhanārīśvara was linked to peoples associated with the third gender marker. I only encountered hypothetical, theoretical, or at best passing mention of Ardhanārīśvara as relevant to these populations. I could find no substantial work actually engaging third gender people regarding their relationship to the deity. To account for these gaps and shortcomings, I identified some pertinent avenues of research. Today, I will acquaint you with two of them and then follow with more pointed analyses. The first context I'll introduce you to is that of Durgā Pūjā, a Hindu festival starring the goddess Durga, who is particularly popular in the region of West Bengal. Durga is commonly depicted with 10 arms, and she is shown with her lion or tiger vehicle mount, often attacking Mahisha, a demon she famously defeats in battle. In part, the Durgā Pūjā festival celebrates this event. Central to the public celebration of Durgā Pūjā are its pandals, temporary structures erected for the festivities. Generally, each pandal contains a sculptural image of the goddess Durga subduing Mahisha while flanked by accompanying deities. This framework is nowadays brought to life as neighborhood groups and various associations compete with each other to produce the best displays. Some of the pandals are modest, while others are extravagant. It is popular for festival goers to travel from one compelling installation to the next, something known as pandal hopping. This is particularly true for urban centers like Kolkata, from which these pictures come. Here we have the interior of one puja pandal. Inside each, Durga and her accompanying figures are also artistically crafted, ranging from traditional to innovative. In this connection, an important trend should be highlighted: the emergence of themed pandals. Here is one stylized with playing cards and another with Lego. Rachel McDermott, a leading scholar on Durgā Pūjā, notes that one pandal from 2001 was shaped like the World Trade Center following its terrorist attacks, and that the demon Mahisha has been shown in the likeness of public figures within pandal displays, including Bill Clinton in the aftermath of his sex scandal. Tacit here is the implication that pandals also serve as platforms to showcase religious, social, and political commentary. The spirit of themed innovation and the purposing of the pandal as a public platform to voice socio-political concerns merge in cases involving Ardhanārīśvara, to which I now turn. In 2015, numerous news outlets reported that an idol was being modeled after Ardhanārīśvara for the Durgā Pūjā festivities. This initiative was spearheaded by Kolkata's Prache Gender Trust, a collective largely focused on trans issues, which I will refer to as the PG team. Their festival figure was significant in that it modified the standard Durga in all her female glory so that half the body was that of the male Shiva. Intriguingly, their Ardhanārīśvara icon was also advertised as India's first transgender Durga idol widely by the media. Fortunately, I was able to interview Anindya Hadra, a self-identifying trans woman and core member of the PGT, who was instrumental in implementing this novel design. Anindya told me that the PGT decided to involve themselves with a Durgā Pūjā display in order to create visibility for trans persons in the public sphere, given their widespread exclusion during such celebrations. In this connection, they chose to foreground Ardhanārīśvara as a symbol for the inclusion of trans people. When asked why Ardhanārīśvara was viewed as appropriate for this undertaking, she explained that many trans persons viewed the figure as positively pointing to possibilities beyond fixed gender and sex binaries. I should note Anindya was careful to clarify that she used the term transgender as a loose marker, explaining, for example, that some members of the PGT identify specifically with South Asian categories of gender variance. Moreover, despite recognizing the devotional manner in which trans folks engaged the figure, she mindfully stopped short of calling Ardhanārīśvara a trans deity herself. Instead, Anindya explained that Ardhanārīśvara has multiple meanings, and that while the figure does resonate with trans folks, their use of Ardhanārīśvara was meant to encourage everyone to come together and think critically. In her words, their implementation of Ardhanārīśvara was meant to challenge the domination of society by males of upper castes and classes and evoke discussions tied to gender and inclusion. In 2016, the PGT involved themselves with another Ardhanārīśvara-inspired installation, though it was not as newsworthy. In part, this was perhaps due to the fact that Ardhanārīśvara was presented in the abstract rather than anthropomorphically. Instead of showcasing an Ardhanārīśvara figure, this iteration instead saw the pandal space developed in a manner influenced by the deity. This included having the coloring of the backing pandal wall divided down the middle in order to reflect the bifurcation of Ardhanārīśvara. This would also be the final year the PGT entertained this mode of involvement. 2016 was well into the current reign of Prime Minister Modi's BJP political party in India, a government often described as Hindutva. That is, one aiming to establish a Hindu hegemonic presence within the country. The PGT held related concerns, namely what they felt were governmental practices of Hinduization in tandem with the erasure of Islam. The PGT feared that in continuously forwarding Ardhanārīśvara, they could be taken as supporters of Hindutva politics and risked Hinduizing trans spaces themselves. As such, the PGT ceased implementing Ardhanārīśvara within the Durgā Pūjā festival. One second. Nevertheless, following a gap of 1 year, Ardhanārīśvara would reappear in the headlines of 2018. This offering was facilitated by Ranjita Sinha, a trans woman and transgender activist unaffiliated with the PGT. Despite being housed in her home for Durgā Pūjā, the 2018 icon remained elaborately and meticulously crafted. In part, this was due to the fact there was something to celebrate. Ranjita selected Ardhanārīśvara as a means of commemorating the Indian Supreme Court's decision to repeal a colonial-era law criminalizing sodomy, an event widely framed in news media as the decriminalization of gay sex in India. The repealing of this archaic law in 2018 may have been the impetus for utilizing Ardhanārīśvara, but far more should be said for the Durgā Pūjā proceedings led by Ranjita. Thankfully, I was able to interview her in 2021 via Zoom during the pandemic, as I had Anindya. Ranjita described her 2018 Ardhanārīśvara installation as involving trans people at every level. Under the supervision of a well-known artisan, a trans man constructed the image. Trans folk prepared offerings of food for the deity, and a trans man served as the priest overseeing the festival rites. Given the extensive involvement of trans people, I asked how Ranjita felt Ardhanārīśvara particularly relates to this population. She explained that Ardhanārīśvara is symbolic of man and woman in the same body, and linked this to trans people feeling they are either born into a male body with a female soul or a female body with a male soul. While the PGT expressed reservations over presenting Ardhanārīśvara as a religious icon chiefly for trans people, Ranjita, who was aware of the reservation, saw framing Ardhanārīśvara this way as beneficial. She told me that trans people must have a stake in all areas of society, including religion, and that aligning with Ardhanārīśvara may help this along. At the same time, though, she denounced any exclusivism. Ranjita stated that although her household puja was by trans people, it was for everyone. She even distanced their puja from a strictly Hindu framework, describing the Brahmanical system as a kind of patriarchy, and their Ardhanārīśvara as a marker for all marginalized peoples, be they of any religion or no religion at all. This inclusive sentiment underscored the 9 nights celebrated in her home. Each night, a different marginalized group was given the spotlight and provided adoration, including acid attack victims, those with HIV, sex workers, LGBT peoples, and homeless girls. Ranjita would go on to host 2 more years of Durgā Pūjā in her home. Then, in 2021, Ranjita's Ardhanārīśvara Durgā Pūjā figure was moved to a trans shelter she oversees elsewhere in Kolkata. Ranjita invited me to join her for Durgā Pūjā at this shelter, and finally, in 2022, I was able to take her up on the offer for what would be a landmark year. To mark her 5th consecutive year of presenting Durga as Ardhanārīśvara, Ranjita had a second image of the deity introduced. The 2-story trans shelter, home to roughly 24 trans men and trans women, and its attached pandal served as my home base throughout all the festival days. Upon arrival, I was struck by the artistically stretched and draped white, pink, and blue fabrics that constituted the pandal structure, a clear evocation of the transgender flag. At the back of the festival marquee was the new Ardhanārīśvara, which, though considerably larger, resembled the design used in the 4 preceding years. To fill out the decor, a sizable cutout of Ardhanārīśvara was brought down from the 2nd floor of the shelter and placed near the main attraction, while photos of the Ardhanārīśvara used in previous years were hung around the inner pandal walls. Interestingly, the subject of these photographs was found just inside the adjacent shelter. Although a new Ardhanārīśvara image was created, their first one was still in use. It was placed inside the trans shelter for Durgā Pūjā, and Ranjita explained that following the festival, one idol would be brought back to her residence, while the other would remain in the shelter permanently. I was told that worship of this image would occur year-round, with shelter residents taking turns doing so. And it must be said that both festival images were very much ritually engaged during my stay throughout the festival. At first, I thought they were being addressed in line with traditional liturgies meant for the goddess Durga. However, I noticed that Ranjita and an accompanying trans priestess seemed to make unique offerings to the male and female halves. When asked if this was the case, she confirmed and explained that a special Ardhanārīśvara puja had been devised by the trans priest who was involved in the first year she introduced the deity. I'm currently in the process of communicating with this trans priest regarding the details of the Ardhanārīśvara puja, but will say it does, as mentioned, include special offerings for the male and female halves, as well as mantras that have been altered to, in his words, reflect a spirit of inclusivity and the recognition of diverse gender identities. To be sure, the energy surrounding the 2022 Pandal was palpable. News reporters came by, the Australian Consulate General visited, and the adoration of marginalized groups, including of orphan children pictured here, again took place. But certainly the shelter residents buzzed the most. One proudly told me that the Ardhanārīśvara idol within the shelter would serve as mother and father to the residents without parents. And another, who told me trans people are forms of Ardhanārīśvara themselves, said that their pandal would show anyone who recognizes Ardhanārīśvara as divine that trans people are worthy of respect. However, the seriousness of their efforts should not be overstated. Certainly, there was great joy permeating the festival days, a sense of togetherness and a thrill felt for creating this celebration. However, there would be a shift in tone after I left. Ranjita had hinted a few times that she was compartmentalizing some issues so to be present and enjoy Durgā Pūjā. Following my departure, though, she messaged me indicating that her and the shelter residents had gathered near the West Bengal Chief Minister's house to protest an act they felt was transphobic. The trans shelter had been delisted from receiving a large government grant that would have helped fund their Durgā Pūjā efforts, something they had received the year prior. With images of Ardhanārīśvara in tow, they congregated but were broken up by police in a clash that turned physical. A reminder, Ranjita said, that there is work yet to be done. At this time, we will shift our focus to a second context involving Ardhanārīśvara, a recently founded transgender religious order, the Kinnar Akhāḍā. In order to adequately do so, I should first revisit the third gender marker as it relates to some issues we will navigate. In 2014, the Supreme Court of India, in its Nalsa vs. Union of India writ petition, officially recognized the ability for transgender people to identify as a third gender. Accordingly, within Indian legal contexts, third gender has been used interchangeably with transgender, which has certainly not been without its issues. For one, both terms, third gender and transgender, have been used as umbrella terms, under which exist a variety of diverse Indian populations, including Yogapas, Kotis, and Shiv Shaktis. Thus, the third gender designation has in many ways collapsed diversity under its banner. Moreover, the aforementioned Nalsa case ruling largely presents one third gender group, the Hijras, as its quintessential representative. This population is particularly relevant for us here, so I will briefly introduce them. It is popularly understood that South Asian Hijra peoples do not fit neatly into a male-female polarity and are thus generalized akin to a middle gender that combines the characteristics of man and woman, or neither man nor woman. In part, these descriptions reflect the understanding that Hijra populations are mainly comprised of people assigned male at birth, who later adopt practices considered feminine, and who undergo ritual castration. Be that as it may, scholar Gayatri Reddy notes that such descriptions are essentialist and misleading. She asserts that Hijras are not just a sexual or gendered category. Like the members of any other community in India, their identities are shaped by a range of other axes. For example, Hijras situate themselves within 7 lineages and live in households with sophisticated social structures involving nuanced terminologies. Additionally, hijras have unique positions and functions within the religious sphere. For instance, hijras are associated with both auspicious functions and inauspicious potential in that they can bless people with fertility or curse them with infertility. Accordingly, they are hired, mainly by Hindu patrons, to bestow blessings at weddings and births. Furthermore, hijras have their own associated deities, such as the Hindu goddess Bahuchara Mata, and celebrate festivals, such as the Kuvagam festival, which centers on another Hindu figure, Aravan. However, there are notable Islamic influences within hijra social organization and culture too. For example, the founders of the 7 hijra lineages reportedly adhered to Islam. Quranic verses often hang on Mecca-facing walls within hijra households, and ethnographies featuring them report halal meat as preferred. In fact, despite widespread worship of the Hindu goddess Bahuchara Mata, many hijras readily identify as Muslim. Thus, the hijras of India demonstrate a syncretic religious life uniquely their own. Yet, despite their sophisticated social fabric and unique place within religiosity, hijras are often stigmatized and have long been subjected to tremendous abuse. This brings me to Lakshmi Narayan Tripathi, someone I interviewed once on Zoom and another time in person in Delhi. Lakshmi became initiated as a hijra in 1998. From here, she became one of their fiercest, most famous, and most accomplished champions. She would go on to become chairperson of an NGO concerned with hijra well-being, star in Between the Lines, an award-winning documentary on the lives of hijras, serve as a presenter at the 16th World AIDS Conference in Toronto, compete as a celebrity contestant on an Indian reality television show, and serve as petitioner in the groundbreaking Nalsa case, helping to secure third gender recognition in India. However, her crowning achievements thus far may well be her founding of the Kinnar Akhāḍā and her appointment as Acharya Mahamandaleshwar, head of the order. Akhāḍā can refer to gymnasium or wrestling ground. However, in India, there is a system of martial ascetics, primarily men, who are divided into groups also known as akharas. And here the term means something closer to regiment. Traditionally, there have been 13 such akharas. However, this number was controversially put into question when Lakshmi introduced the Kinnar Akhāḍā in 2015. Due to pushback from a governing body overseeing the Akhāra system, the Kinnar Akhāḍā ultimately became situated under one of the 13 established Akharas, but for all intents and purposes, it currently operates as a separate entity. In an interview I had with her, Lakshmi described the Kinnar Akhāḍā as the first transgender religious order. To clarify, though, this religious order has no primary location and instead gathers for key occasions, including festivals such as the Kumbh Mela shown here. However, despite her own description of the Kinnar Akhāḍā as a transgender order, Lakshmi clarified that admission into their fold may occur irrespective of gender or sexual orientation. Nonetheless, in looking at the term Kinnar, we see an evident emphasis on third gender peoples who indeed comprise the bulk of its membership. The term Kinnara, from which Kinnar derives, has been described as putting into question the personhood or perhaps manhood of whoever it designates. In fact, researcher Lochtfeld translates Kinnara as "what man?" Perhaps Kinnar was taken up precisely for this interrogative connotation, in a rhetorical sense, as a means of embracing a perceived divergence from masculinity. Although Lakshmi did not speak to this possible etymological development directly, she described Kinnar as a third gender identifier in no uncertain terms. Interestingly, when asked about the term Kinnar, Lakshmi emphasized that the word is a Hindu one. Indeed, Lakshmi selected many Hindu-affiliated markers for the order. For example, she told me that their Akara needed to have a text, so the Shiva Purana, a Hindu text, was chosen. They needed a symbolic weapon, so a sword inspired by that of Bahuchara Mata, a Hindu goddess, was adopted. And they needed an official seal, so had one made featuring a topical member of the Hindu pantheon, Ardhanārīśvara. I first suspected Ardhanārīśvara was relevant to the Kinnar Akhāḍā after seeing an image of the figure fixed atop the entranceway of their 2019 Kumbh Mela camp. Later, Lakshmi would tell me she actually selected Ardhanārīśvara as official god of the Kinnar Akhāḍā. She explained this decision by describing the Kinnar identifying people of her order as similar to Ardhanārīśvara in that they too are a masculine-feminine mix. As such, the figure also reflects the Kinnar Akhāḍā aims of challenging Akara androcentrism and patriarchy more broadly. Interestingly, Lakshmi disclosed during an in-person interview that a high-ranking member of the order, Bhavani Ma, had actually created an Ardhanārīśvara temple on the outskirts of Delhi. After learning that Bhavani Ma would be leaving for elsewhere in India the following afternoon, I raced to her temple early that next morning. This is how Ardhanārīśvara is depicted inside. Note that the face here is divided into male and female halves. With an official text, official god, and even its own Ardhanārīśvara temple, it would seem that the Kinnar Akhāḍā is comfortably established. However, it has certainly not been operating without controversy. Lakshmi has expressly described the Kinnar Akhāḍā as a Hindu order, and accordingly attached distinctly Hindu features to it. Yet remember that Hijra culture contains Islamic elements within it. Indeed, Lakshmi, who appears distanced from her Hijra past, has been accused of filtering out Islamic elements of Hijra life in shaping Kinnar Akhāḍā identity, and has been described as aligning herself with Hindu nationalist policies tied to the vilification of Islam. Even her foregrounding of the term Kinnar has been framed as a deliberate Hinduizing of third gender life. Helping such accusations along is the fact that Ardhanārīśvara is accompanied by a saffron flag on the Kinnar Akhāḍā seal. The saffron flag is not exclusive to, but deeply connected with, Hindu nationalist organizations, and thus utilizing it in Kinnar Akhāḍā imagery invites comparisons. For her part, Lakshmi fiercely denies such allegiances, instead stating she will align with whoever she deems fit in uplifting third gender peoples, even, evidently, the Hindu powers that be. In examining Ardhanārīśvara within these Durgā Pūjā and Kinnar Akhāḍā contexts, my research has successfully moved away from those theoretical and hypothetical mentions of Ardhanārīśvara as relevant to third gender peoples. And in doing so, I've determined that related populations do, in fact, conceptualize and operationalize Ardhanārīśvara in meaningful and innovative ways. Now, this is all particularly interesting for a number of reasons. For one, scholarship has described Ardhanārīśvara as codifying androcentric patriarchal values. Wendy Doniger, for example, suggests that Ardhanārīśvara must always be regarded as a form of the male Shiva. In support of this view, she notes that Ardhanārīśvara is declined as a masculine noun in Sanskrit and points to narratives granting preeminence to Shiva within the Ardhanārīśvara form. Furthermore, it has been routinely highlighted that the female half of Ardhanārīśvara occupies the inferior left side positioning. However, in the cases we've looked at, the left and right halves of Ardhanārīśvara were not articulated as subordinate and otherwise. Instead, both were granted importance and very much taken together. In fact, in the Durgā Pūjā cases, the female half remained on the left, and if anything, primacy was afforded to Durga. Ardhanārīśvara was even described as a form of the goddess, both by members of the PGT as well as Ranjita. Perhaps this is to be expected. After all, the central figure of any puja pandal will be viewed as Durga, no matter her visual reimagining. As such, it could be argued that Ardhanārīśvara simply served as a transferable aesthetic. However, my impression is that this went beyond mere stylization. Ardhanārīśvara was presented as a valid form of the goddess, at least as attributable to her as Shiva. Moreover, far from understood as reifying androcentrism, Ardhanārīśvara was utilized in service of challenging patriarchy in both the Durgā Pūjā and Kinnar Akhāḍā cases. It should also be highlighted that Ardhanārīśvara has in some ways actually served as a largely heteronormative figure. This is evident in several Puranic mythological narratives involving the deity. These narratives usually explain why the male and female halves of the figure merge together or split apart. In cases of fusion, the god Shiva often grants the left half of his body to Parvati as a reward for her devotion or to pacify her distress. In such instances, Ardhanārīśvara is taken to be symbolic of their conjugal relations. In cases of fission, the male and female halves of Ardhanārīśvara split apart and yield male and female offspring in order to demonstrate to another god that procreation is only possible with two sexes. While these connotations certainly remain alive and well, I have shown that Ardhanārīśvara is also contemporarily being made to disrupt the dominance of heterosexual and cisgender frameworks. Relatedly, the Durgā Pūjā examples saw the figure innovatively implemented in a number of ways. As a marker calling for and celebrating the inclusion of those marginalized for their gender identity, as an activistic emblem counteracting regimes deemed oppressive to these demographics, and as a rallying point for the reconsideration of gender norms, roles, and identities. In this connection, Ardhanārīśvara was also framed in relation to political legal events, such as the decriminalization of gay sex in India. Importantly, I have encountered no mention of Ardhanārīśvara as applied in these ways within available scholarship. Now, it is true that Ardhanārīśvara has been positively rendered emblematic of non-dual metaphysics. However, as Alkapande notes, the image of Ardhanārīśvara in these instances points to philosophical constructs rather than social or cultural expressions. What she's highlighting here, as many scholars have, is the fact that while divine figures possessing both male and female characteristics have been venerated, human embodiments of sexual and gender atypicality have regularly been afforded opposite treatment. In fact, Wendy Doniger even highlights textual instances in which Shiva is mocked, when his Ardhanārīśvara form is recalled with literal mindedness and put on par with that of mundane creatures. Yet such distinctions between divine and mundane models have clearly not precluded people from drawing upon Ardhanārīśvara as a legitimizer of human realities. To be sure, the Durgā Pūjā and Kinnar Akhāḍā cases saw Ardhanārīśvara purposed to affirm the value of those identifying between or beyond a gender binary. Moreover, both Anindya and Ranjita described trans folk resonating with Ardhanārīśvara for seeing something of themselves in the deity and vice versa. Ranjita even had an idol of Ardhanārīśvara placed in a pandal colored after the transgender flag, and another fixed permanently within her Kolkata trans shelter. Lakshmi too used transgender to describe the people within her order. This transgender connection is worth some attention, for it no doubt reflects a development in the ongoing history of Ardhanārīśvara. After all, the relationship of those identifying as trans with the deity can only be as old as the transgender term itself, which is rather young, particularly in the Indian context, and especially compared to Ardhanārīśvara. Furthermore, within scholarly ethnographies, self-identifying Hijras constitute the only actual third gender peoples cited as having felt connections to Ardhanārīśvara. Yet here we see transgender, an increasingly global term, at the fore. However, Anindya of the PGT utilized transgender as a loose marker, so to include South Asian categories of gender variance, and Lakshmi interchanged the term with Kinnar. It should be said then that Ardhanārīśvara lies at a nexus of discourses infused with sensibilities originating both within and outside South Asia. In addition to the recognition of South Asian forms of gender variance, recall too that Ranjita presented Ardhanārīśvara as a symbol for all peoples discriminated for their sex and/or gender, including sex workers, LGBT peoples, and women who've experienced acid attacks. Therefore, while the transgender term has no doubt been emphasized, Ardhanārīśvara has also served as a marker akin to the more broadly inclusive pride flag. And just as this rainbowed flag flies in both pride and protest, Ardhanārīśvara was made emblematic of initiatives that both marked the acceptance of diversity and objected to systems deemed oppressive. There were, of course, differences in the cases we looked at, most notably in how Ardhanārīśvara was framed in relation to Hindu religiosity. Anindya and the PGT, concerned they would be mistaken for supporting a Hindu hegemony, discontinued their use of the figure. Ranjita, unlike Anindya, deemed it worthwhile to continue presenting Ardhanārīśvara as a religious icon for trans people. However, she decidedly distinguished her undertakings from Brahmanical Hindu traditions. For her part, Lakshmi unquestionably and controversially is Hindu aligned and also presented Ardhanārīśvara squarely as such. Yet all felt, at least at a point, that the recognizability and respected Hindu affiliation of Ardhanārīśvara would aid in transforming attitudes towards third gender communities within Indian society. In closing, I will say that increasingly, Ardhanārīśvara is framed as having vindicating ties to tradition, while clearly being innovatively and strategically advanced in the pursuit of upward social mobility by those aiming to rectify their marginalization. As such, we're looking at a dynamic new phase in the unfolding history of this compelling figure. Thank you. And I can do questions whenever.
Do we have any questions in the space? Or any of those of you who are joining us on Zoom, feel free to place your questions in the chat.
Hi, Phil. Really interesting work, which I've read in more detail. So I know there's more stuff that you're doing with this topic. But specifically, some of the pictures that you showed, I had a couple of questions. One with the PGT's, first Ardhanārīśvara. It was interesting. So it looked like it was unattired. Was that the final idol that was up, because it just seemed to have a form And then I assume they put clothing on top of it, or did they leave it, with that form because they were making some kind of making a very specific political statement, I'll say. And the second question is, Ranjita, one of your interlocutors, you mentioned that she talked about the male and female soul.
Yeah.
Right. So she said biology, and then it wasn't gender, it was soul.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about, categorizing gender as an ensouled thing, and how that also intersects with, I guess, religiosity, because it seems to be coming from a place of religiosity for her.
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to both of those questions. Okay, so for the first one, with the initial Ardhanārīśvara introduced in 2015 by the PGT, I think that I do include some images that end up showing it clothed, maybe one or two, but certainly some of those that I showed were while it was being constructed. And there probably is a good reason why there's so many photos of it out there during this construction, is because when the PGT decided to do Ardhanārīśvara for Durgā Pūjā, they approached a female artisan in the Kumartoli district of Kolkata, one of the very few female artisans of the district. And at that time, the Durga image that was available was full-on female. So the artisan was then made to turn half of the image male. Now, the PGT people that were involved in organizing this image found this to be particularly interesting. They framed it as Durga having sex reassignment surgery, and it became quite a buzz. Now, this female artisan of that district is already something of a celebrity on her own merits. So the fact that she was involved and the fact that the Durga was being altered in this way gathered a lot of attention, even during the construction phase. So that's what I'll say about that. Sure, yeah. Very true, very true. And then the second question was, about the souls. Okay, so when I first asked Ranjita how she felt Ardhanārīśvara relates to transgender people, I expected perhaps her to describe a temporal shift, that the male and female halves of the figure could be read as a transition from male to female or female to male. Instead, my impression of what she said, her sentiment of being female with a male soul or male with a female soul perhaps described a state of pre-transition, or one that transition does not necessarily fully rescind. But to your insight there, the fact that she uses the word soul at all really shows that this global category of transgender takes on different meanings within such context. It blends with understandings that are more local. So that's a very interesting moment of intersection there. Oh, there's a...
Yes, I have one in the chat here. Would you like me to read it out loud?
Sure, and you can say who it's from, I guess. Or is...
So we have it up here on the screen for those of you in the space. So from Amina, is the union of male and female parts of Shiva half of Pavarte, making the idol heteronormative?
Okay. Yes, I mean, that is, I got into it a little bit there, but I mean, obviously what I'm showing here too is that there's various ways to read the figure. Now, one of them, there are certainly heteronormative connotations to this deity, especially when you look at Puranic narratives. In case it wasn't caught, some of these narratives describe why the male and female halves come together or split apart. In either case, fusion or fission, there are heteronormative connotations there. Now, I'm also, okay, so I also look at other contexts involving Ardhanārīśvara. I don't only look at the figure in terms of these third gender spheres. So I look at the figure, for example, at its temple and surrounding community in Tiruchengodu, Tamil Nadu. And there the figure is very much viewed as, or it's very much tied to heteronormative sentiments. People go there, single men and women go there, hoping to secure a marriage with somebody of the opposite sex through worship of Ardhanārīśvara. There's various rituals tied to Ardhanārīśvara that have very heteronormative flavors. So the heteronormative connotations of the figure are certainly alive and well out there too. Okay.
Do we have any other questions?
Thank you, Phil. I'm kind of interested in, like you've talked about the ways in which, especially in the context of the Durgā Pūjā, and I guess also in the context of the Kinnar Akhāḍā, that that the image of Ardhanārīśvara is used as a kind of as a vehicle or a platform for challenging, maybe challenging received ideas, but also engaging with, I think engaging with social issues, right? I mean, we're really talking about problems of discrimination against certain social groups. We're talking about, you know, the activism of Lakshmi and so forth really is, you know, try to incorporate trans people or female identifying people into these various contexts. But I mean, in some ways, like it steers away from the political, like, you know, the actual politics of things, right? It's really Ardhanārīśvara, and I think this is why on India, where the PGT people said we're not going to do this anymore because it's getting to be political.
Sure.
So I just wonder if you think there's any opportunity, any possibility, or for Ardhanārīśvara to get involved in contemporary Indian politics.
In politics.
Yeah.
Yes, these are good questions. And insights. Certainly in India was steering away. Ranjita, though, has not fully steered away. She even brought Ardhanārīśvara signs in protest against being defunded. So I don't think that there's the same hesitancy there. And Lakshmi, I mean, at least some people feel she's very politically motivated and she's got, you know, Ardhanārīśvara on the seal there. In terms of context beyond what we're looking at here, something that I very much do want to look at is how Ardhanārīśvara has been being taken up into some of these conversations just more popularly in terms of, you know, online media within, you know, pride protests, et cetera, et cetera. So I am curious to investigate that a little bit more. I also want to say that Ardhanārīśvara is kind of, although it's not exactly political, although it might be tied to the Indian government. Okay, recently there was these India's Transgender Awards, and the trophy given out at those awards is a golden Ardhanārīśvara. So I think that it is creeping into more of these spaces just across the board. Although that might not be an exactly political thing, I think that it's finding itself in political areas through, let's say, Lakshmi. It's finding itself in popular media sources. It's finding itself at transgender awards. I think it's across the board now.
Last call for questions.
Oh,
Did you want to respond?
no, I thought there was another one, but maybe it's gone.
Sorry, this is a little half formed, but I was wondering, you mentioned Bahuchara Mata
Yeah,
as being used as or like revered in some Hijra communities as a patron deity of some sort. Do you know of any issues, I guess, with this the concern about the exclusion of Muslim Hijras because of the embrace of that deity? Like, I'm just wondering the dynamics that you mentioned regarding Ardhanārīśvara with the Kinnar Akhāḍā. Is there
Sure.
any documentation about something kind of like that?
well, there's a few things that I'll say to that. One, like I spent time at this Ranjita's trans shelter, and it was very Ardhanārīśvara focused, of course. They had it in the pandal and they were gonna install one permanently in the trans shelter. But if you go in the trans shelter, already in a common room is a very large picture of Ardhanārīśvara, and beside it is Bahuchara Mata. So, and this is a shelter that is not Hijra identifying. It's much more transgender. I mean, I want to say in a global sense, but obviously they have Ardhanārīśvara and Bahuchara Mata on the wall. So it's an interesting kind of site of intersections there, and Bahuchara Mata has also found her way in there. Although I don't think was receiving as much focus there, but she was there. Now, the other thing with Bahuchara Mata, which is interesting, and I should give it more thought given your question, is that Lakshmi, although she adopted Ardhanārīśvara as official god of the Kinnar Akhāḍā, they also recognize Bahuchara Mata, which is interesting because she's being accused of filtering out Islamic elements of Hijra life. But I guess it's okay because it's a Hindu goddess. I'm not sure if it's that, thought out. Like, these are accusations leveled against her. I don't know that she feels that way, but Bahuchara Mata is also within the Kinnar Akhāḍā fold as well. Yeah.
Any other questions?
All right, I think those might be the last questions. So I just want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Phil, for this
you.
really great talk. We're really looking forward to see what form the book takes at some
Great.
point. Our next event will actually be on the 5th of February, so pretty soon. And we'll have Professor Farhana Sultana from Syracuse giving a talk on environmental politics. So we hope that you will make it for that event too. So thank you all very much for coming. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody at the South Asia Speaker Series for coming into FourSpace today and activating this conversation on the unfolding of Ardhanārīśvara. Everyone online and those of you here in the space, thank you for your questions. We're going to be closing up the Zoom and the live stream now, but just a quick reminder that this conversation is already available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit or share it. So please join us once again at FourSpace. We love having you here. Have a great evening. Thanks.